It is a real honor to welcome back to The Truth Peter Schweizer. He's a celebrated author. He's written 23 books. I don't know whether I've read 23 books or not. I think I have. And he also was the founder of Government Accountability Institute. Boy, does that ring true. We need accountability in government. And he was a senior editor at Breitbart News, among a host of other celebrated items on his CV. If I told you all of them, we wouldn't have time for the interview. Peter, welcome.
Great to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
So nice to have you. So you've written a new book. It's called The Invisible Coup, and it's about the migration that we're experiencing. And you say it's all not by accident. You know, we've been fed the line, I think the narrative has been, that all these people are trying to come to America for a better life.
Right.
But in your book, you describe something much more sinister, in fact, subversive to our national interests.
Yeah, we've been having this important national conversation about immigration, and usually, John, it's about how it affects wages, crime in our streets, and those are important issues. But there's something else going on. It's the weaponization of immigration. And what the book is really about is how foreign adversaries and people domestically in the United States, NGOs, are using it as a weapon to undermine and subvert our society. And it's not me really saying that. A lot of the book is quoting these people saying that's precisely why they're doing it. So we're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood, China, Mexico. And then domestically, we're talking about progressives and NGOs, and in some case, political figures who see a political advantage to mass migration. It's not a conspiracy in the sense they're sitting down and comparing notes. It's a confluence of interests. They all benefit by this arrangement. That's why they're pushing it so hard.
So the people in Mexico don't look at it as a illegal alien invasion of our country. They say that they look at it as taking back what is rightfully theirs, right?
Yes.
Along our southern border. Tell us about that.
Exactly. I mean, this is one of the more surprising things I discovered, and that is when you start looking at what senior Mexican officials say, how they describe mass migration. They don't view it as a terrible stain on Mexico, that millions of their people are leaving Mexico. They don't just see it as they get $60 billion every year in money flowing back to Mexico. They actually see it as a retaking of their territory. So this is the territory, of course, in the 19th century. They lost to the United States. They sold parts of what we now know as the southwestern United States to our government. But they see this as Reconquista. And again, this is not me saying this per se, it's in government reports. In December of 2024, there was a report by one of President Sheinbaum's top aides who said, there are now 39.9 million Mexicans living in the United States. We are retaking the territory that was stolen from us. And I could read dozens of quotes from other officials saying the same thing. So it has a geopolitical significance. And they view it as a way of gaining, the Mexican government, of gaining sovereignty, elements of sovereignty in American states. And to a certain extent, they already have in very, very specific ways. We just have not been paying attention.
That's a real scary proposition to me. Having immigrants come to our country has always been part of our culture. That's how we started.
Yep.
But one of the great things about when people would come here, they came here because they wanted the quality of life and the American dream, but they assimilated into our culture. You describe something very different in your book.
Yeah, and look, it may be that some of those migrants do want to assimilate. The problem is, in the case of Mexico, the policy of the Mexican government, their vast network of consulates, and the NGOs and organizations they set up in the United States is to fight against assimilation. In fact, I quote a senior Mexican official, Alejandro Robles. He serves in the Mexican parliament. He's a senior leader in the Morena party, which is the ruling party, but he lives in California. He lives in Ontario, California. And he said in 2025 in an interview that Mexicans that come to the United States, embrace American values, and become Americanized are traitors to Mexico. And he says President Sheinbaum agrees with him. So this is the posture they adopt. China certainly does the same thing. So does the Muslim Brotherhood. The point is, if somebody does assimilate, they're doing it swimming against this current that their own government and that these NGOs want. They do not want assimilation, these groups do, because they see it as a way of transforming and changing America in the image they want it to be.
Well, our recent president, Barack Obama, famously said that he thought that we needed a transformation in America, wholesale change.
Yeah.
Is this part of what he was talking about?
100%. And if you look at Barack Obama's rise, his rise in politics was aided by very radical immigrant groups like the FMLN, which was basically a terrorist group in El Salvador. They have a large political network in the United States, and they were critical in helping Barack Obama get the Democratic nomination because members of that organization ran some of the more radical labor unions. And Barack Obama returned the favor by loosening immigration restrictions and pushing for the transformation of America. And that's what you find, John, when you start looking at the actual literature of what these NGOs say. They tell you that's why they want immigration. It has less to do with humanitarian elements. It has much more to do with their stated goal of transforming the country. And the way you transform the country is by changing the people and bringing in people who don't have not adopted those American values, prevent them from adopting them, bring their own cultural and political values in, and now you have modified the country. And they're very explicit. That is their goal behind mass migration.
Does that scare you?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
It really scares me as I was reading your book. And I read one section about a member of Congress who has dual citizenship in the United States and a South American country. I can't remember, Guatemala.
Yeah.
And she said that her first loyalty was to her native land.
Yeah.
Now, help me understand why that is not borderline treasonous. You're in our United States Congress, but your loyalty rests with one of our, I don't know that they're an ally, but they're more adversarial right now than ally, I think, because they've shipped us a lot of their prisoners and mentally ill people to this country.
Yeah, no, it's and you see this pattern, unfortunately, with people that have these dual loyalties, but also with these foreign governments. So in the case of Mexico, again, they actually have a bureaucracy inside the Mexican Foreign Ministry. It's called the Institute for Mexicans Abroad. And what they do is they work through NGOs in the United States, and they say their goal is to get immigrants in the United States to put Mexico first, not the United States. So think about that. We got America first with Donald Trump. You've got the Mexican government pushing Mexico first. They do not want the loyalties of immigrants to be to our country. When President Sheinbaum of Mexico came into office, one of the first things she did was she commissioned a song called the Migrant Hymn. And the Migrant Hymn, she plays it at all the official events. And the song is about when you leave Mexico and go to the United States, you still have Mexico's colors in your blood. And your job should be to serve your people and your government, which are in Mexico, not to serve the American government. So this is what's going on a massive scale. It's very different than the immigration of 50 or 100 years ago. My parents were immigrants, where you came here, you were encouraged to assimilate. Very few institutions are now encouraging immigrants to assimilate. They're being told, stick to the values you had in your home country, stick to the loyalties that you had to your home country, and that the United States is kind of a terrible, evil place. You don't want to be part of it anyway. That's the way you're going to fragment and tear apart a society.
That just fits into the conversation that it's planned and it's intentional. And it's not looking for the American dream. It's looking really to come here and do our country harm in the long run.
Yes. And it's interesting, the test case for this was the Mario boat lift in Florida. I certainly remember it. Maybe a lot of other people don't. But what happened in 1980 is Fidel Castro wanted to clean out his prisons. He wanted to clean out his mental health institutions, and he wanted to send these people to the United States. So a boat lift took place, and it looked like a refugee crisis to begin with. And Jimmy Carter famously said, we're going to welcome them with open arms. to which Fidel Castro told his aides, well, we're going to fill his arms with human excrement. I won't use the exact word he used. And so he literally exported tens of thousands of violent psychopaths, criminals, sometimes Cuban intelligence agents. And what's interesting about this, John, is our government did a study in the early 2000s where they looked at the 3 most successful attacks against America. And they said number 1 was Pearl Harbor, number 2 was 9/11, and number 3 was this Mariel boat lift in terms of the damage they caused in the country. But the report talked about, John, that what happened after Pearl Harbor? We attacked and defeated militarily the Japanese Empire. After 9/11, what did we do? We destroyed Al-Qaeda. The problem is with the Mariel boat lift and with this immigration crisis, who do you attack? Who do you use your military against? It's a genius way to attack an adversary through migration because there are not obvious military targets. You can't fix it by striking at your enemy. That's why it's so brilliant, and that's why it's been replicated ever since, but based on what Fidel Castro did in 1980 with the Mariel boat lift.
Well, if we haven't depressed the audience enough so far or made you anxious, you also talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, a secret global organization intent on using migration to foster Islamic doctrine.
Yeah, huge problem. Muslim Brotherhood's not as well a known organization to a lot of people, but it's vitally important. It's been banned in a lot of countries like Austria and in the United Arab Emirates because it's a radical Islamist group that supports terrorism. And what you need to know about the Muslim Brotherhood is that they were actively involved in 9/11. Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, both members of the Muslim Brotherhood. And what they've done now in the United States is they've used migration as a weapon, and I quote them extensively in the book, describing how you can use migration to transform a country and a society politically, spiritually, and culturally. So this is actively part of their agenda. And John, they don't need a majority. As we saw in New York with the election of Mamdani, they say openly that if they have roughly 10 or 11% of the population in a given locale, that's enough because most Americans are too apathetic to vote, especially in primary elections. So this is a concerted part of their strategy. And you have these imams that come and preach at these mosques in the United States who come here on R1 religious visas and say the most outrageous things about the United States. It is a concerted effort to undermine what they say is Western civilization and defeating Western civilization for the sake of Allah.
It almost feels like our system of government and the freedoms that we extend to our citizenry and the advantages that they have, like being able to vote, are really being exploited by our adversaries to come here and then undermine what we're trying to do as a nation.
100%. They take something that I think is a beautiful part of America's history, which is immigration. People come from around the world. They're aspiring for liberty. They want a better quality of life. They come here and they assimilate. They say, okay, this is part of the American system. This is a beautiful thing. How can we turn it against them? How can we turn it against the United States? How can we weaponize something that's good?
Like child care in Minnesota, for instance?
Yeah, exactly right. And there's another example where when you look at what happened in Minnesota with the Somalis, it is an example of, these are what they call low trust societies, Somalia, so there's a lot of corruption, but it's also encouraged and organized. I quote in the book several imams who say that they actually encourage Muslims to engage in fraud in public assistance because it's tantamount to a tax on non-Muslims that should be paid to Muslims. I think they call it jizrat. So you've actually have people that are saying, not only do this because you're going to make money, you have a religious duty to do this. That's where the weaponization comes in.
It's really a head scratcher, isn't it? I mean, how is Ilhan Omar still in this country? She defrauded our immigration policies by marrying her brother to facilitate him being able to live here. She came here, I think, with a negative net worth of, I don't know, $6,000 or $60,000, something like that.
Right.
And now she's worth 25 mil.
Right.
Since 2018.
Yeah. Once she got into politics.
She should teach a course at Harvard Business School.
Yeah. By the way, she made her money not in the private sector. She really cashed in once she became a member of Congress. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, she's not the only one.
Yes, she's not the only one. But this pattern of what you see with Ilhan Omar and that you see with Rashida Tlaib and with Andre Carson, people that come into Congress, they are Muslims, and they talk about the fact that they feel an obligation to see Islam spread in the United States. Andre Carson, a Democrat from Indiana in Congress, has talked about Islamic schools and how we should apply the principles of these madrasas to public schools in America. There's no sense of, wait a minute, we have this unique American civilization that served us well, let's stick with that. No, we're going to import these cultural values and transform our educational system.
Well, tell us, I first came to know you from having read Red-Handed, which I was really intrigued by, and it really raised the consciousness in my mind about the overarching influence that China has in our country.
Yeah.
And the ties that they have with our political leaders.
Yeah.
It was really a scary proposition. And then when I interviewed you last, it was right after you had just released Blood Money, which was another fascinating book, kind of a sequel to Red-Handed. Where do you see China's position relative to the U.S. right now? It seems to me that since Trump has become president, tell me if I'm wrong, this is just a casual observation, that the temperature's been lowered a bit. Even though Biden, I think it's pretty well understood, had taken money from China, was allowing them to fly their spy balloons over our country and just open the southern borders. Supposedly there are 150,000 military age fit men in the country, and we don't even know where they are, let alone who they are.
Yeah.
Where do you see us with China right now?
I think we are highly vulnerable to China in a way that has really not been on people's radar screen, and I think the book has brought attention to this, and I'm encouraged and hopeful that we're going to do something about it. And again, it's this weaponization of immigration. So what has China done? You take an issue like birthright citizenship. That's this idea that if you're born in the United States, you are automatically granted U.S. citizenship. And again, you'd think, well, this is a beautiful thing, right? We're all Americans, but what has China done? China has created an industrial scale exploitation of birthright citizenship and taken it to horrific dimensions. So what do I mean? They created an industry called birth tourism in China that arranges for pregnant women in China to fly to the United States, stay here, give birth. As soon as the child can fly, the mother and child fly back to China. The child will now be raised inside communist China, in CCP schools, in CCP culture. But when that child turns 18, that child is a U.S. citizen. Having been raised in China, they're going to be able to vote in elections. They're going to be able to donate to political campaigns. So the question then becomes, how many have actually done this? And the problem is our federal government has no idea. Because when you get a birth certificate, it does not list the citizenship or nationality of the parents. So we have absolutely no clue. China has looked at this. The Chinese government has looked at it, and the Chinese government has encouraged this behavior, by the way, in multiple ways I'm glad to talk about. The Chinese government has looked at this. Private research firms in China have looked at this, and the numbers are eye-popping. They estimate that over the last 13 years, every single year, roughly 100,000 Chinese babies have been born in the United States and then transferred back to China where they will be raised, and they're going to be U.S. citizens. So we're looking at more than 1 million, I'm going to put that in air quotes, U.S. citizens who are being raised in China who are going to start voting in our elections around 2030. So 1 million votes. Go back to that 2016 election, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump. That was settled by 72,000 votes. Million votes is a lot of votes. And they have a right to do it. They can file absentee ballots. All they have to do is establish residency somewhere. You can do that by renting an apartment. A lot of voter laws allow you to establish residency a week before elections. So it's a massive, massive vulnerability that we're unaware of. And they're very, very good at exploiting these kinds of arrangements. So that's what really scares me.
Well, General Robert Spalding, who you probably know, wrote a great book called Stealth Warfare. General Spalding was on The Truth with us a couple of years ago. He says we're literally at war with China.
Yes.
And that never a shot will be fired. And you're making the case on how they're going to pull it off. I mean, what is, Donald Trump is tough.
Yeah.
And Biden, he's everything Biden isn't.
Right.
I really thought he was going to straighten the relationship between the United States and China out. And I think in some ways he has done a good job. But then he, interestingly, has allowed 600,000 Chinese students to come to the United States, which is a kind of a puzzle to me. I don't understand what his thoughts are. Do you have any insight?
And again, I don't know. I have not talked to Trump about China policy and whatnot. My sense is...
Well, that's a mistake on his part. You should be in the Oval Office right now.
Well, and I have talked to him about the book, and he's aware of the details in the book. I think where Trump is right now with China is he is trying to identify what his priorities are, and he's focusing on those. So I think one of those is fentanyl. He has said to the Chinese, you need to deal with your part of fentanyl and you are a central player in it. And if you don't, you're going to have problems. He's talking to them about the tariffs policy. So I think it's a question of him organizing priorities. When it comes to the birthright citizenship issue and the problems with China I just mentioned, that's something that is being addressed by the Supreme Court this spring. And that's because Donald Trump signed in an executive order essentially saying, no, birthright citizenship does not exist in an unlimited way, in the way that you're talking about it. And I do have very strong reasons to believe, I can't go into the details, that the information in my book is going to be part of the argument that the government presents at the Supreme Court. That, in other words, China is engaging in a massive industrial scale exploitation of birthright citizenship that is tantamount to an invasion.
That's really scary stuff. I'm so grateful that you brought it to the forefront, and hopefully the adults will show up in the room and deal with it appropriately. So what do you think is going on in Venezuela? I don't think it was fentanyl. Right. I don't think it was oil. It may have been the icing on the cake, but why was Trump so focused on Venezuela?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's one of those instances where there could be a multiple number of motivations, all of which are good, which makes it an even more attractive thing to do, right? Because you're accomplishing a series of things by one singular action. I think that in the competition with China, it was a brilliant move. Why? Because Venezuela is a major oil supplier to China. And what he has now signaled is, you know what, you're not going to have these little set-aside deals with Venezuela. We're taking away this unique supply of oil that you have from an allied country. It gives him more leverage over China, which I think is helpful.
Well, he's also drawn a red line relative to Panama and the Panama Canal, which evidently China has been controlling for the last several years.
Exactly right. You got Chinese companies that have been at both ends. That is now also changing. So I think the oil was a factor with regards to China and cutting off that resource from them. I think also when you're looking at Venezuela, there is the drug component of it. But one thing that's overlooked is the Venezuelan government under Maduro was central to the drug cartel trade. They called it the Cartel of the Suns. That was the name of the government-backed cartel. That cartel not only was selling drugs, but they were central to the radical movements taking place in Latin America, whether it's the Morena Party in Mexico, whether it's what's going on in Colombia and Brazil. Essentially, this Venezuelan cartel was funding these radical movements. Now you take that funding away. So you've eliminated the oil for exports to China. You're eliminating the drug revenues going to stirring up problems in Latin America. And then I think you have the third component, which is geostrategic. You look around the entire Latin American region, who do you have that were sort of part of this, what used to be called maybe an axis of evil? You had Venezuela, you could look at Brazil under Lula, and you could look at Cuba. Well, now you've taken out Venezuela, Brazil is suddenly more quiet, and now you can actually realistically look at the possibility that communism might fall in Cuba. Because where else was the Venezuelan oil going? What were they? They were subsidizing Cuba. Cuba couldn't even pay for the oil.
And Cuba's really on its heels economically.
Exactly.
You take the oil away, they could be in really bad shape.
Yeah.
Could you make the argument that, we talk about the New World Order, and you see China being aggressive toward Taiwan or threatening to be. You've got Russia in the Ukraine right now. Is this Trump saying, okay, if you guys are going to start expanding your borders, we're going to expand ours. We're going to Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, also Greenland. I mean, is there something there that maybe we're seeing evolve in real time?
Well, I think what we're seeing with Trump is it's not just words. Pretty much every president kind of says tough things, right? We're doing this, we're standing for freedom, we don't like this, we don't like that. Trump's actually taken action now in a major, major way. Brilliantly executed, by the way. The military operation was amazing. So you're seeing that he's backing up his words with serious action. And he's not nibbling around in the periphery. He's going to the heart. Venezuela is the heart of what Cuba and Russia and China are trying to do in Latin America. And he's knocking over that domino. And with that domino falling over, you're going to probably see Cuba fall, which who would have thought we would see that so soon. Yeah. You're going to see others on the left in Latin America on the defensive. Certainly Sheinbaum in Mexico is trying to lay low and be quiet because they see that Trump is willing to exert himself. So it can have a really powerful effect in changing the psychological dynamics of what's happening in the region.
Well, I've read that Sheinbaum is really living in fear because the cartels really run Mexico.
Yes,
and that there's a big sense of fear that if she doesn't kind of play it cool, that she could be in trouble physically.
Yeah, so we know that Sheinbaum and her mentor and predecessor, AMLO, López Obrador, received financial support in their campaigns from the drug cartels. And we know that Sheinbaum, when she was the mayor of Mexico City, which was her previous job, she appointed as the head of the police an individual, I name him in the book, who was known to have ties to the drug cartels. In fact, he was in a police unit that was considered by everybody else to be completely undermined by the drug cartels, that they were cooperating and working with the drug cartels. She plucked him out of that unit and put him in charge of the police in Mexico City. When she became president of Mexico, she made him the third most powerful man in the national police. Wow. So why are you doing that? You're doing that because you're either threatened, you owe favors, or you're continued to enjoy financial benefits from being tied to the drug cartels. And that's why I think that Trump is really pressing her to allow the United States to go in and take out the drug cartels. She's going to try to walk that line of giving some things to Trump to give the appearance of cooperation, but she can't cross the line and give full cooperation because of her ties to the cartels.
Well, I've got another 2.5 hours of questions for you, but we're out of time. I do want to ask you one final question, and
Sure.
that is, I think Trump really, a big part of his reelection was based on immigration.
Yeah.
The American people demanded a closed border. I think it polls like 75 or 80% want our borders closed. Now, conversely and interestingly, he is delivering his campaign promises, and he is massively deporting people that came here illegally, especially the bad guys. And it's not helping him politically.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that, and what do you suppose the solution might be? Because the midterms are coming up.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think what you're seeing is people don't like all the tumult it's causing. And the tumult is why? Because you've got radical groups that are saying, we don't like these federal immigration laws, so we're going to make it really difficult for you to carry them out, and we're going to cause chaos on the streets. And the last time you saw something like this, local officials like the governor of Minnesota, Walz, and others, local officials saying we're going to defy the federal government,
Unprecedented.
It was a civil war. And in the 1960s, there was a little bit of this. There were pockets of this in the American South when there was desegregation. You had in some towns mayors that would say, nope, we're not doing it here. The bottom line is we know that federal authority trumps local and state authority, and they do not have the right, no individual has the right to restrict and prevent federal law enforcement from enforcing federal laws. So people don't like the tumult. They don't like the scenes on the street that we're seeing in Minneapolis, that we saw in Los Angeles, but it's necessary work. And I think at the end of the day, as far as the midterms are concerned, the economy's improving. It's really going to take off and gather steam. I think that will matter more to voters than the chaos that is being generated by Trump's opponents as it comes to enforcing the immigration laws.
Do you worry that this country could devolve into a civil war?
I don't know if it would be a civil war and we imagine it in our history books, but I can certainly see a situation where you're going to have certain states, it's already happening, like California and Minnesota, saying, we don't like Trump. Yeah, we know that we had an election and we know that people voted for this and we know that it's on the books, but we're just going to defy it because the political power of the Democrats necessitates mass migration. It's part of their key core constituency and they need it.
Well, thank you very much, Peter Schweizer. It's been a fun conversation. I really appreciate your coming and being on the show with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure.